Welcome to this special edition of Automation Insights. I'm Renee Bassett, Chief Editor of Automation.com, the publications arm of the International Society of Automation, or ISA. You can find out more about ISA at www.isa.org. Our Automation Insights interviews usually focus on information for automation professionals, insights designed for asset owners and industrial operations staff who want to improve production efficiencies, secure and optimize facilities, or transform their manufacturing and industrial businesses. However, today's episode has some unique information for business-to-business suppliers and marketers of industrial automation equipment. Automation.com partnered with marketing agency RH Blake on new research regarding the purchasing journey of manufacturers. The results gives marketers new insights into their customers' expectations, behaviors, and pain points. Here with me to step through some of the results of this survey is Dan Konstantinovsky, Strategy Director for RH Blake.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you all for joining us today. This year's manufacturing buyer journey research points to a clear shift. Buyers are becoming more independent in how they research, more selective in who they trust, and just more complex in how they make decisions. They're engaging with sales later, relying heavily on supplier websites, consulting independent resources, using AI more often, and involving larger buying committees. But at the same time, decisions are not getting faster, even with CapEx expectations increasing. So today, I want to walk you through 10 takeaways from the research and what they mean for manufacturing marketers trying to build awareness, preference, and trust in a longer, more complex buying journey.
Before we jump into the research, just a little bit about RH Blake. Our marketing agency, been around more than 30 years, specialize in the manufacturing ecosystem, specifically with clients in the automation, semiconductor, and energy spaces. Those with long sales cycles, complex offerings. And all of our marketing programs are developed with that long sales cycle in mind. So everything from developing a structured marketing program to creating, refining, positioning in particular value propositions to their markets to generating leads. We really focused on driving awareness of preference and trust for complex manufacturing decisions. Here's some examples of who we help. Clients range in size, but the common theme are long sales cycles, risk-averse buyers, technology-enabled, and product launch focused. And here's how we're broken up. Many times when we work with clients, we start with strategy to get a better understanding of how their target customers think, where they go to make decisions, and who's influencing those decisions. And then we build out the marketing program from there, typically involving elements of digital and content. And now let's jump into the research. So as I mentioned up front, this is a proprietary research where we interviewed 121 global leaders with 66% holding significant or final decision authority. This is a continuation of the research that RH Blake has done for the past couple of years. So these insights should be treated as year-over-year comparisons as directional, but not strictly longitudinal. First takeaway is that buyers aren't waiting. They're engaging earlier, but with a short list in hand. The data to demonstrate this is that 81% of manufacturing buyers have a short list before they ever contact a vendor. And so one insight for manufacturing marketers is that we have to make sure that the content that's out there is meaningfully creating awareness and preference and educating your target customers in a way so that number one, you can land on the short list, but two, land on the short list in a way that favorably positions you. As you see here, within the first 10% of the buying journey, nearly a quarter of the buyers are looking to speak with a vendor. What that indicates to us is that they're looking for your expertise. They haven't even started meaningfully down the road of education and exploring. They're really leaning on you, the manufacturing supplier, to help them better understand their challenges and see what alternatives are out. Another takeaway is that the vendor website is the primary commercial content asset. So you see here with the graph on the right, no surprise, your target customers are using a variety of sources to better understand what suppliers are out there, what options are out there. But the key theme is that vendor websites are used throughout the research process. So not just in the awareness phase, but also in the decision. And so one takeaway there is that your website should address your target customers throughout that buying journey. Since those target customers are going to be going back to your website throughout their education process, making sure you understand what are the typical questions and hesitations they have, and that you have content that meaningfully addresses those questions is extremely important to ensure that you end up on that short list and that your content does an effective job educating the customers throughout their buying journey. The third takeaway is that vendors think that they understand the buying process, but buyers disagree. Only 29% of buyers say vendors understand their process very or extremely well. And so this disconnect creates a big challenge from a supplier's perspective. If your target customers don't feel like that you understand how they make decisions and who they need to internally get on their side to propel forward, that's going to impact your likelihood of success. So a few action steps is one, auditing your marketing program, including your website and thought leadership against that buying journey and seeing where the gaps are. Also, training your sales teams beyond just the product features or the solution capabilities, but training them on how the typical buying decisions are made at your target customers. And then lastly, consider using proprietary research as a sales enablement signal of market understanding. For many manufacturers, if they're entering a new market or if they're launching a product, they don't have case studies to point to. And so proprietary research, similar to this report, complemented with subject matter expertise, is a great way to indicate to the market that you understand their particular nuances of their application, their challenges. The fourth takeaway is that AI adoption has nearly doubled, but trust with AI has barely moved. And so the data that shows here is that AI use for supplier research surged from 23% just 2 years ago to 48% in 2026. But the trust of those AI tools sits at only 4.9 out of 10. And so the key takeaways there is that you, of course, as a manufacturing marketer now, it's imperative that you structure your marketing program to show up in those awareness stages so that large language models index you and position you in those initial queries. But just as important is understanding that customers aren't going to just take whatever those LLMs provide them and run with that. They're going to go back to independent sources, your website, to validate what those LLMs have returned. And so making sure that your content in your marketing materials are technically accurate and also favorably position you is now more important than ever.
The fifth takeaway is that CapEx is expanding, but buying cycles are lengthening. In essence, more budget does not mean faster decisions. One of the more important findings is that even though CapEx expectations are improving, manufacturing buying cycles are not getting any shorter. In fact, 12-month plus buying cycles jumped to 34%, even as 52% of respondents expect CapEx to increase. That creates an important challenge for marketers. More available budget does not automatically create urgency. Buyers may have funding, but they still need to justify risk, validate the need, and build internal alignment, and feel confident really that the investment will pay off. So for manufacturing marketers, this means campaign bursts are not enough. Marketing needs to support a longer decision process with sustained visibility, useful mid-journey content, and messaging that keeps the business case alive and consistent over time. The companies that win will be the ones that help buyers understand not only why to act, but why to act now. The sixth takeaway is the second part really of that complexity story that we just mentioned in fifth takeaway, and is that the decisions are not just taking longer, they're also involving more people. As you see here, 83% of manufacturing purchases now involve 5 or more evaluators, and nearly 20% involve more than 9. That means marketers cannot rely on general messaging for the entire buying process. Functions like engineering, operations, procurement, and C-level executive leadership may all evaluate the same decision through a different lens. And each group has different questions, hesitations, concerns, and proof requirements. So for manufacturing marketers, really the opportunity is to create content that helps buying committees align. That means role-specific messaging, persona-based proof points, and sales enablement tools that helps internal champions build confidence across the organization. In complex sales, marketing is not just creating demand, it's also helping buyer groups reach agreement and reach agreement faster.
Buying triggers are shifting is another takeaway. So just a few years ago, likely you would have had buying triggers that are more focused on perhaps energy, sustainability. But as you see here, the biggest buying triggers today are around asset aging, capacity expansion, and safety. And so understanding your target customers' compelling events, what would cause them to think differently around their business, and then monitoring those compelling events and then reaching out at the appropriate time to be a potential solution around those is extremely important. The earlier you can understand those compelling events, the earlier you can introduce yourself as a potential solution to those target customers as they're experiencing them, the higher the likelihood you have of maybe framing how you could help compared to some alternative suppliers. The eighth takeaway is that thought leadership has moved upstream, shaping challenges, not just resolving them. Historically, thought leadership has been used by marketers as more of a decision tool for lead generation. But what we're seeing with this research is that thought leadership is now relied on more on the awareness stage, where customers aren't really sure how to frame the challenges that they're experiencing or frame the objectives that they need to be mindful of. They rely on thought leadership from suppliers to help them get better educated around how to perceive the business and how experts are suggesting that they structure their thinking when it comes to their particular application. Ninth takeaway is that thought leadership is not just for creating education, it actually drives commercial outcomes. So you see here, 87% of your target customers think more positively about an organization with effective thought leadership, and 82% are more likely to contact an organization if you're producing effective thought leadership. Beyond marketing, the reason this is important is that it helps your sales folks accelerate the sales process. If the hurdles or the barriers are lower for them to get introduced into a new account because you've created the right awareness in the market with effective thought leadership, the more likely they are to get those sales conversations and the more likely they are to be able to nurture throughout that buying journey. So as a marketer of thought leadership, of course, it's important to create the awareness around your brand, but there's direct, measurable commercial impact to also on the sales side to accelerate through the sales cycle when thought leadership is effective. And lastly, what is effective thought leadership? So when we interviewed manufacturers and asked them to rank, what does good thought leadership look like? Real world expertise, relevant challenges, and strong research data were the top three ranking factors for what they perceive as quality thought leadership. So as you, a manufacturing marketer, are going back to create a thought leadership initiative, keep in mind that those are the key criteria from the customer's perspective that they're looking for what is effective thought leadership. And unfortunately, based on the research, it sounds like we're headed in the wrong direction a little bit from a marketing perspective, where in just 2 years ago, 62% felt the quality of thought leadership was sufficient that was out there, but today it's 48%. And so one way to kind of reverse that trend is to consider what target customers appreciate around thought leadership and integrate that into your program.
So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. The big story really from this year's manufacturing buying journey research is that buying process has become more self-directed, more complex, and more trust sensitive. Manufacturing buyers are doing more research than they ever have before they engage with sales. They're forming shortlists earlier, relying heavily on supplier websites, using independent resources, and increasingly turning to AI to help evaluate options. But even as digital research expands, trust really remains the central issue. Buyers still need credible proof, technical relevance, real world expertise, and content that helps them reduce the risk. At the same time, the buying process is becoming harder to move through. CapEx expectations may be improving, but decisions are not necessarily getting any faster. For manufacturing marketers, the takeaway really is clear. The companies that win in this environment will not simply be the ones with the best products or solutions. They will be the ones that help buyers make sense of all of this complexity, build confidence earlier, and move larger buying groups from interest to action quicker. If you'd like to download the full report, visit rhblake.com, or you see the direct URL link right there on the screen. Thank you.